Okay, so I'm at the head of this fly. I'm gonna do my dubbing loop bulkhead, and I'm gonna do a blend of black and kind of a caramel color. Now, the thing that I found really tricky about this to begin with was getting the density right. Like getting enough hair, just the right amount of hair for the amount of shank I had left. And at first I was leaving myself way too much shank. And then I started leaving about the right amount of space, but I had too much hair and then not enough hair. But what kind of made this all make more sense to me is just doing it like a regular reverse bulkhead or bulkhead. And what I mean by that is, instead of treating this like it's some wild technique of its own, this dubbing loop bulkhead, I stop and I leave myself enough shank as I would as if I was going to do a regular reverse bulkhead. So just 3 tie-ins of reverse bulkhead. So I know I've got my space right. And then for the amount of hair, like I said, I left myself enough space for 3 reverse bulkheads. So I grab enough hair for 3 reverse bulkheads. It sounds really simple, but it took me a while to come to that realization that I already knew. And this is obviously dependent on you knowing how to do a reverse bulkhead or a regular bulkhead and just being comfortable with that technique. But it took me a while to realize that I already knew how to do this, or at least I knew how to get the densities right and get the amount of hair right and leave myself the right amount of space. So make sure you're good with that technique first, doing bulkheads and stuff, and then let that tell you how much space to leave, how much hair to use, and how dense you want it, and how long to leave your butts, because that's another thing I did wrong when I first started doing this technique, is leaving the butts way too long. Because I just wasn't thinking, this is just a bulkhead. That's all it is. You're just putting it in a dubbing loop. Everything else is the same. So I've got 2 bulkheads worth of black hair, and I'm gonna grab about 1 bulkhead tie's worth of brown caramel hair. And you wanna grab this hair from down near the base of your tail where it's nice and airy, and it'll flare really well, because in this technique you're not reefing on the shank. I mean, you do want to wrap this pretty tight, but you're just not going to be able to pull on that thread the way you would doing a regular tie. So really what's flaring the hair here is you spinning the dubbing loop and that thread pinching that hair, which is also why you need to spread this hair out thinner than you would think, because it needs to have room for the thread to twist in between most of the fibers and pinch them. If you go too dense, when you start spinning your dubbing loop, that hair is not going to allow that thread to spin in between it. And what it's going to do is it's going to, when either end of that clump starts spinning, it's just going to start sliding that clump in towards itself and making it denser and denser. And then you wind up with one big clump that's not flared, and you can't wrap it around here, and it all falls out. Make sure you get all those shorter fibers out. And then I'm gonna mix these 2 colors together. And I will go ahead and tell you, I'm not very graceful with this. If you watch Gunner Bramer do it. He's much more smooth with this than I am. But I just kind of like to put it in my hand, fan it out a little bit. Rip it into a couple piles, stack it back on top of itself. Try to not get the butt ends too out of whack doing this. And I'm not gonna worry too much about getting it nice and mixed in. I don't care if it's every other fiber is black and then brown, as long as it's not in one big clump. And I'm gonna add a little bit of black in there because I pulled out a little more hair than I had planned on it when I was getting those short fibers out. So easy fix. Just grab a little bit more black. And I'm gonna lay that black right here on top of my stack. Kind of mash it together there. Now I'm gonna take this stack, because I'm such a messy mixer of colors, I'm gonna put mine in a Loon Magnum hair stacker. If you're not as sloppy as me in mixing these colors, you don't really need to do this. You can just stack it in your hand a little bit, but I get these pretty jacked up when I'm mixing the colors. So it's much easier for me to just put these in here and be done with it. Now you want to make sure that your dubbing loop is nice and waxed up, so you don't do what I did just a few minutes ago, which, if you'll notice, I've already made my dubbing loop, and that's because what got edited out was that I did this whole process and got my density right, and took my hand to go to spin and dropped all of my hair out of here on the floor. So, you know, if you screw it up, don't feel bad. I screwed it up. 5 minutes ago, I had all of my hair fall out onto the floor after I had gotten everything just how I wanted it. So what I'm gonna do, it's kind of in one big clump now. I'm just gonna start spreading this clump out. I'm gonna try to keep it pulled fairly tight so I don't drop all my hair again like I did the last time. I'm actually gonna put just a couple of spins on there to keep that from happening, hopefully. Just be careful as you're moving this around. You want to get rid of any big thick clumps of it first, because those big thick clumps are spreading apart the two threads of your dubbing loop, and that's going to let the other stuff fall out. So kind of you know, get the big clumps dispersed first, and then just keep slowly, thoroughly making it thinner and thinner and thinner. And what I kind of like to do to make sure I've got my density correct is I'm just pinching and letting these dense spots run away from themselves. So when you pinch a big clump of it, it's going to want to spread out and run away from that pressure of your finger. Use that to your advantage. I'm just coming in here, I'm pinching, I'm rolling a little bit with my fingers to kind of push these fibers right where I want them. You want to try to keep them as parallel as possible. If you start getting them all crossed at different angles when you go to spin, they're not gonna let the thread twist between them. They're just gonna bind up, and you'll wind up with a mess, and it's really hard to pick all that stuff out without just losing a lot of your bucktail. And the density here, you're gonna spread this stuff out. For me, it was a lot thinner than I originally thought it should be. Just because, if you go too thick, it's not gonna work. It's not gonna capture these fibers. They're just gonna clump up and fall out. So if you go too thick, your dubbing loop's ruined and it's not gonna work. If you go too thin, you just have to do more wraps. It's not a big deal. This is 150 denier GSP, so it's not taking up that much room. So it really doesn't make that big of a difference if you have to do a few extra wraps. Just make sure you don't have it too thick. And if this tells you anything, I've got mine spread out over about 5 inches right now. And I'm gonna push my butts in because as I've been working this hair around, they've been sliding. My butt ends are getting longer and longer. I don't want them terribly long. I just want them about as long as I would for any other bulkhead. Again, don't let this technique freak you out. It's just a bulkhead. Everything else you know about bulkheads still applies here. Nothing has really changed. Still trying to keep all those fibers as parallel as possible. And I'm not gonna spin this up all at once. I'm gonna stop a couple times in there to make sure this stuff is actually spinning and getting twisted by this thread and not just wrapping around the core. And you'll see it sometimes as you start to twist it up. You'll watch it some of these fibers start to kick over and they want to tangle with themselves. Slow down, straighten them out, use your bodkin, and then go back to spinning. It's not a big deal, but you want to fix it when you see it. Don't just keep spinning and try to fix it later because it's much more difficult that way, I think. Make sure you don't have any thin spots in there. And keep this pulled pretty tight. Get some good spins going. And it's harder on these bigger shanks because they don't want to, they're kind of flimsy. They don't give you the resistance you really need, but and I forgot to turn this camera on. And if you're asking yourself, what's the point of this? There's not much of a point. It just looks cool. It's a good way to get a cool blend of colors. That's one advantage to it. But you can definitely achieve these results in easier ways. If you start mixing in, I think the main point of this is when you want to start mixing in synthetics and flash. But for what I'm doing here with just straight bucktail, there's not a lot of point to it except to try something new. It looks cool when you're doing it. You can take a side video of it, show all your buddies. It's a really cool shot. It's just a good way to flex on them. So, not really. Nobody's gonna think you're that cool for doing this. Yourself, I feel really cool when I do this, but I'm probably the only person that thinks that. Now, you can see I've got this good and tight here. You can give some good pulls on that. It's not going anywhere. You do want to be careful. If you really crank on this, even with this 150, you will start cutting that hair. Now, you're going to do this just like hackle or like a dubbing brush. So you're just going to kind of start wrapping it and using your rotary function on your vise to twist it back. I'm going to try to get this a little bit more out of my way. And I think it helps to wet your fingers a little bit. But just pull back as you're wrapping, or as I'm wrapping, I'm pulling the fibers that I've already wrapped back out of the way, and I'm preening back the fibers I'm about to wrap just to make sure I'm not trapping anything. I'm going about a half turn or a quarter turn at a time, and you want to get a good hold on this shank when you're doing this too. So as I'm wrapping, I'm grabbing hold of that shank and I'm pulling tight. I'm pulling this dubbing loop tight and making sure with my fingers that I'm not moving this shank around in my vise. And again, take your time with this. Go half turn or quarter turn at a time. If you start really rushing through this, trying to do a few turns at a time, that's when you're going to start trapping a bunch of stuff and it's just going to look like a mess. And you definitely want to make sure before you start this that your vise has a really good grip on your shank and it's not going anywhere, because when you get to this stage right here and that shank falls out of the vise, that is about the most annoying, frustrating thing that can happen. And also be careful the way you're orienting your dubbing loop tool, because some of these, this little bend on this hook doesn't bend that far around, and it's pretty easy sometimes to have that loop slide off your tool without you realizing that that was coming. And then that makes it pretty hard to finish this up. Just keep being patient, keep carefully craning this back, going slow, quarter turn at a time or a half turn at a time, just kind of depending on how much your dubbing loop is cooperating with you. Get a couple more wraps over this. Being careful not to trap too much down. Okay, got that. You can cut that dubbing loop now. And what I'm going to do now, a couple things. One, I'm going to straighten up this shank because you can see that it's kind of gone a little crooked on me as I was wrapping. I build up a little dam there just to control some of these unruly fibers. And now what I'm going to do to trim all those butts where they don't look so abrupt is I'm going to pull all the full length fibers back. Actually, I'm going to whip finish for this even though I'm not completely done. Just to get that thread out of my way. Now, I'm going to pull back all these full length fibers and I'm just going to feather back these butts so it doesn't look, these look pretty good already, honestly, but if you pull back those full length fibers, those butts will just kind of poke through. And I'm just tapering those back a little bit. That way they blend in with the silhouette a little bit better and that they just don't have that hard edge to them. Okay, and you can see here that I've got a little more shank length left than needed. Not much, but I've got just a little bit of extra shank in the front. What I'm going to do with that is something I haven't done this on a musky fly before, but I saw Gunnar Bramer do it in a video I watched the other day. And it looked pretty cool, so I'm gonna give it a shot. And what I'm gonna do is take and palmer a pheasant rump feather in front of that, just to fill up that little bit of extra space I have left over and give it a little bit more detail. Because if there's one thing I love to do with my flies, it's make them more complicated than they need to be. It's a huge passion of mine, as seen by the fact that I'm doing a dubbing loop bulkhead for a musky fly. And I'm just looking through here in the longer feathers for one that I like the coloration on. That one. That one's gonna be just gonna be a good blend for this fly. So I'm going to trim that stem very short. And we'll lock that in. I'm going to grab this by the tip and kind of preen these fibers back. And then just wrap this forward like a little collar. And I'm actually gonna, well, let's see if that'll cooperate with me. Yeah, now it's gonna cooperate. Okay, it wasn't wanting to go the direction I wanted it to go, but it's working for me now. Okay, throw in the whip finish. And clean that eye up just a little bit. Got a couple of rogue fibers in there. Okay. A little dab of super glue. Well, my super glue is clogged up. There we go. Give it a little brush through just to get everything kind of blended together. And there you have it. A dubbing loop bulkhead.